Okay, karma, reincarnation, or rebirth. And again, this is another week where all of these things are not, all of these three topics are not separate from each other. So we're going to go back and forth a bit. So karma and reincarnation. Buddha says, of course, there is no fixed and permanent self. We learned that when we talked about emptiness. But still, somehow, early Buddhists believed in reincarnation. So even the Buddha had visions of his past lives. He's sitting under the Bodhi tree. He's trying to get to the root of suffering. He has visions of his past lives. How can that be? How can we reconcile these two things? So I think a useful image is if we think of a flame on a candle, and we're passing that flame from one candle to another. The first flame is the cause of the second, but you wouldn't say it's the same flame. You wouldn't say that flame has been sort of reborn over here, right? Something's been passed. Some energy, some life, some forces have been passed. The other image I like is one ocean wave tends to set up another ocean wave, and yet we can distinctly see there are ocean waves. It's not like one sort of takes on the form of the next and disappears. So we set causes and conditions in motion in this life, and then somehow those forces continue after we leave the physical world. And I think we can all think of some example of that, right? Somehow an ancestor we had did something and set some forces in motion, and we are still affected by that. I think I've given the example of we've all probably had immigrant ancestors. Somebody makes a choice to get on a boat, and look at how different our life would be, right, if that hadn't happened. There's something that carries forward, right? So although there's no sort of, in this tradition, there's no soul that sort of inherits a different human body, it doesn't work like that. There's just this continuing function of the universe along this trajectory of causes and conditions. So something happens, right, and human beings keep getting born, and moment by moment things continue to arise, and that is a way that we can look at rebirth or reincarnation. Rebirth is better in this context. So karma is about cause and effect, right? We all know karma is about cause and effect. So doing good, bringing wholesomeness into this world will result in something positive, probably liberation from suffering for ourselves and others. Doing something unwholesome in this world, carrying something not so nice into this world, results in something negative, which is probably suffering for ourselves or for other beings. So that means our experience of our circumstances is of our own making. The circumstances might be out of our control, but our experience of those circumstances is of our own making. So just like our practice can only be done by ourselves, no one can practice for us, we also have some control over our experience of things. Our habituated thinking is a chain that gets moving. Oh, this thing always happens to me. Oh, it's always like this. Really? So our habits sort of come into play here. So we can take responsibility for what we do in the world and for the result of that for ourselves and for other beings. The force of our actions of body, speech, and mind, that's the three places we create karma, right? That's all we can use, body, speech, and mind. So that is connected with teachings about karma. So the force of that, whatever our actions are, body, speech, and mind, that's what shapes our situation, our experience, our destiny. Right? We have a hand in that. We are not sort of victims of random stuff. Having said that, we need to be really careful not to twist this teaching and use it to blame the victim, because historically that's been done. It would be easy to say to somebody who is suffering, that's your fault. I'm not going to help you. Right? You have inherited some unwholesome, unhappy condition, you are living in poverty, or you are discriminated against, or you have health issues, or whatever that is, and that's all your fault from your past lives. You must have done terrible things, so you're on your own. Does that sound like a bodhisattva to you? We have to be really, really careful. I think we can fall into that kind of pitfall the same way we can use precepts as a yardstick to judge people. Oh, you broke such and so precept, so somehow I'm better than you, right? We have to be really careful with all of these teachings. These are not things we use to judge and evaluate other people. These are things we use to look at our own life, our own practice, our own actions of body, speech, and mind, and say, how could I be more wholesome? How can I let go of unwholesomeness, right? So it is not okay to be looking at other people, passing judgment, blaming them for something, right? Again, doesn't mean we don't deal with toxic behavior. It means we do that with wisdom and compassion. So at some point then, these karmic forces that we've set in motion will come to an end. We can stop perpetuating the suffering that goes, around and around on the 12-fold chain, on the wheel of samsara. That is the point, of course, of the Fourth Noble Truth. There is something we can do. So we can cultivate wisdom and compassion. We can see the true nature of self. We can stop doing things that keep us trapped in this transmigration through these 6 realms of samsara. So that might, if we want to take it as, yes, this is a literal rebirth in another realm, we can. We can also look at just our moment-by-moment experience that says, I stubbed my toe and I'm in a hell realm, and now I'm really sleepy and I'm in an animal realm, and the next moment I see my best friend and I'm in a heaven realm, and we're just going around and around. Right? That can be a moment-by-moment, very direct experience of this life right here. We can see how samsara and nirvana are not separate. So, many North Americans are not so comfortable with this teaching about a literal rebirth or a literal reincarnation. Even Toto-san says, I don't believe in that. So I think we have permission to say, how else can we practice with that teaching? There's something valuable there, even if we're not saying there's a literal sort of body being reborn. And again, remember, Buddhism comes up in a Hindu container. So some of this begins before Buddhism, right? Shakyamuni inherits a certain amount of culture, Vedic culture. So if you want to go backwards and sort of look at how that comes to be, you're welcome to do that. So if our moment-to-moment existence, our moment-to-moment activity is based on delusion, then we're going to keep setting up suffering in the next moment, right? We're going to keep setting up those karmic conditions. Suffering's going to keep happening. We're going to be born in the next moment, if you will, surrounded by the greed, anger, and ignorance that we've perpetuated. We're going to keep that chain going. We're going to keep clinging to ego. We're going to really deeply root those habits of unwholesomeness, right? There's something that's going to keep going around. If instead our activity is based on wisdom, it's based on compassion, clear seeing, understanding the nature of self, right? Then in the next, we're sort of born into the next moment, if you will, released from that kind of suffering, because we're setting up positive, wholesome conditions for ourselves and for other beings. So, experiencing nirvana in this moment, not separate from samsara, means we're still here in the physical world. We're living like normal people. Nobody has a golden glow. Nobody becomes transparent. And while that's happening, there's also no attachment to this thing we call I. So this is when Zazen is doing Zazen, floor sweeping is doing floor sweeping, right? Dishwashing is doing dishwashing, walking is doing walking. There is no separation into a self and an action and an outcome, right? There's no one experiencing something. There is just the activity happening. There is no separation. There's just this smooth functioning. So no karma is being created, and eventually those forces that perpetuate suffering run out. That energy runs out. So, the Buddha woke up under the tree and still had to live out his 80 years in this physical form because that force was still running out. So he's no longer generating karma, but something still has to run out. And when those forces run out, then he leaps free of the wheel. So goes the tradition. So Dogen says we also need to have faith that just like everything else, our karma is impermanent. We can feel like we're stuck. Right? I'm stuck in this world of samsara. Dogen says, well, don't forget, just like everything else, karma is impermanent. So we are, if we make some effort to establish an ethical life, to carry out skillful action, to pay attention to what Buddha is teaching, then in this moment, we're influencing the karma we're creating with body, speech, and mind. We can always be looking at what am I doing with this body and with what I'm saying, and even with what I'm thinking. Because, of course, first we think something, and we say something, and we take some action on something. So we can't act in the past. We can't fix anything that's already happened by going back and doing it differently. Like, we all know that, but somehow we think we can go backwards and fix something. We can't do that. We can't act in the future because that hasn't come yet. We can make a plan for it. We can think about it, but we're thinking about it in this moment. That's not acting in the future. So we can't act in the past. We can't act in the future. Right now, we can reaffirm our aspiration to practice rather than to perpetuate some kind of unwholesome, habituated activity. So vow and repentance, right? We haven't talked about that, but vow and repentance. So karma doesn't have any fixed permanent self-nature because nothing does. So at some point, karma arises and changes and unfolds, and we are not stuck in the same circumstances or the same condition that we're in. So we can choose right now. a life of practice and awakening, or a life of something else. We get to choose. So again, we can't often see the unfolding of karma. As we mentioned last time, something happens, and maybe we don't see the effects of that for 100 years, or it happens somewhere away from us, right? We don't always know. We can't see that unfolding, so it takes faith, right, to keep at it, to keep doing the good things and avoiding the unwholesome things, and sort of trusting that when we're putting wholesomeness into the world, we are perpetuating something good. We might not see that right away, but somehow we need to trust that the entire network of interdependent origination is benefited if we're doing beneficial action, we're doing good action. So sometimes we have a big ship to turn. We have a lot of harmful conditions to work with. Might take a long time, so faith is important, right? There's big things we're doing and there's little things we're doing, and maybe we're working towards some major shift. We've got to have some patience with ourselves and compassion for ourselves.